Hello everyone, Bernie Arnason here of Telecompetitor and Pivot. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest installment of our Broadband Industry Innovator video series, where we invite industry leaders to come and talk with us about important broadband industry developments. I have with me today Sean Middleton of Finley Engineering, and Sean is a Director of Strategy and Operations for Finley. So, welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking with Sean today about the importance of middle mile infrastructure in the context of the broadband network and the broadband industry. So we want to move back into the network, if you will, a bit and talk middle mile. So Sean, why don't we start with you just giving a brief background of what you do there at Finley and what visibility you have into the overall broadband industry.
Well, my background, actually, I was with the Electric Cooperative for most of my career, so I had that benefit, and we were one of those electric cooperatives that did move into the foray of broadband. Now I'm with Finley, and I'm able to do the same thing for clients all over the country.
So I think most of us, most Telecompetitor readers, realize the critical nature of middle mile connectivity. I mean, without it, there's no home broadband, there's no mobile communications, there's really no internet to speak of without middle mile. But beyond the obvious, when you look at it as even more of a catalyst of sorts. Kind of elaborate, what do you mean by that?
When I look at middle mile, I truly see it as more like a bridge mechanism. Anybody that's studied the Franklin Covey 7 Habits, one of them is beginning with the end in mind. And truly, when you look at the middle mile perspective as an operation or option for those entities seeking either broadband or broadband coming into their areas, having that kind of as a catalyst that you referred to, it truly can allow for a springboard effect to those things, not only for internal opportunities, but for others. And so I look at it this way. Many times, people will start with, instead of going all the way to fiber to the prem, getting all the way to the consumer, using middle mile as that kind of in-between piece to look at, in general, how are we going to get broadband to those areas? How am I going to foster economic development for a territory?
So I've heard you before. I've heard you talk about looking at middle mile as a great first step opportunity for utilities as they look to get into broadband, which many are certainly doing these days. What does that middle mile opportunity look like for the utility industry?
When it comes to most utilities, especially co-ops and municipals, but others, most of them have an internal communications scheme in place. But what they perhaps fail to do many times, because of legacy systems and need, they've been getting by with, I've seen lots of systems where they're utilizing cellular or low bandwidth communications to get to their substations and do the typical things that utilities do, automated metered infrastructure, their SCADA systems, other things that just didn't need a lot of throughput. What many don't realize is that by enabling middle mile connectivity, not only are there external benefits, but for internal, once you have that more robust communication mechanism to your substations, things like video monitoring, other Wi-Fi, hotspot, local connectivity become more than possible. And yes, of course, going all the way through to full fiber to the prem is where many want to end up, but being able to start with middle mile and bridge that gap, and then having that for internal communications is a huge first step.
So Sean, in your experiences in supporting your clients, talk to me about the growing opportunity you see with funding for middle mile networks. I mean, there is no shortage of funding for the broadband industry in general these days, but talk to us about what's going on with funding for middle mile.
You don't have to read too many news articles to see that both the federal and the state level, the funding's out there. I mean, money's plentiful right now for those kinds of things. But what's interesting is we are seeing more and more clients able to tap into these more regional, county, and local financial opportunities. And the constraints or details are the main things that they're trying to adhere to. I see many of them, especially in middle mile, they'll be concerned about how many homes are passed. And so there's kind of a buffer radius of where the lines are running through. So there's some intelligence to how you're placing the paths to get to where you need to be. But there are more and more entities that recognize this value. Back to my earlier point about the economic development piece, they've already figured out that if they can get their hands on funding and provide it for local entities, they know it's going to spur local development.
So the money's out there, it's just a matter of putting in the time to find it and get it and fund it, right?
That's exactly right. And I'd add, knowing that you've done your homework and you've spent the time, count the cost, to do some of the feasibility of where are you passing the homes. That does take some feasibility assessment. I know we do that for clients all the time. That just becomes something you've got to make sure that you've got a good case to present.
So another area I know you're pretty passionate about, Sean, is finding and facilitating good partnerships. Especially, we spent a lot of time talking about utilities today, but there's some partnership opportunities between those utilities and some of the traditional telecom carriers as well. I mean, what role do you see middle mile networks playing in facilitating or even expanding these potential partnerships?
For those utility entities that are risk averse and are concerned, maybe they're hearing their members clamor about, we need broadband and there's no one else coming, what can we do or how can we be a part? Being in a partnership environment for an entity that doesn't know anything about utility services, ISP services, bringing in someone that already has that, it's a fast track. It truly is. And it's allowing those entities, whether they're just sharing relationship. I've seen partnership relationships be all over the board. Some utilities want to be very involved. Some want to just allow the right of way through for the entity. And think what that does for a telecom provider that needs to get from A to B across, and they're going to have substantial buried costs to do that, where they can be on a utilities aerial plant and become through. Another thing that I think is really great, Bernie, is that what this does is for those ISPs that are kind of landlocked, that need access to tier 1 carriers at fiber hotels in more urban environments, getting on a utility co-op or munis middle mile project, they could allow them to get across those rural areas to get to where they need to and bring in the needed backhaul to make these build outs work.
So listen, you're out here in the industry, the marketplace, seeing a lot of things. You have great visibility into what's going on. What are any other key lessons learned, best practices for partnerships or middle mile in general? Middle mile networks, what would you offer?
I think that one of the big things is entities have to keep an open mind and know there's a two-way street. Everybody's going to have their own expectations and desires and individual outcomes that they want to see. That's one of the critical pieces that we've been, as we're involved with these, getting common vested interests is critical. A lot of people don't recognize what's possible until they start doing this little bit of feasibility and research. It may be you need a feasibility study for your area to assess competition, who's there, what other ISPs are there. Many people don't realize there's ISPs that are looking for this until they go looking. You may think you know your area, but until you do a little digging, you don't realize what's there and what you can facilitate. And that's why I think I made such a passionate plea on the grant parts, because there's money that's not being spent, and it's a matter of why can't you?
Well, Sean, that's a great message, a great place to end today's discussion. Thanks so much for your valuable insight into this important topic, and I look forward to visiting with you and Finley Engineering again on an important broadband industry trend. That does it for this edition of the Broadband Industry Innovator Series, folks. We look forward to visiting with you again soon on another important topic. Take care, everyone. Thanks again.